You mentioned, touching on this question of immigration, you mentioned issues of climate change, and this is one of the most important, perhaps, existential challenges after COVID-19, of course, existential challenges we face globally today. Latin American countries, and particularly countries from the Caribbean, are insisting that they're facing a disproportionate burden when it comes to climate change vis-a-vis other developed countries. What are some of the tools that the Latin American Latinx Studies program at Marquette is offering students to confront these issues of the issue, particularly of climate change?
Well, the first thing I would say is knowledge. We have a lot of people working directly in Latin America, but then we also have people working in political science, in development issues, Monica Onda Gutierrez, for example, or in my class, we talk quite a bit. We read the environmental history of Latin America. It's important, again, it's just important to be aware of the things that are going on in other parts of the world, again, because we're connected to them, right? So much of what's happening in terms of climate change is happening in Latin America, whether we see it or not. So most of us, probably everybody listening, has thought about Brazil and the burning Amazon. That has that sort of incursion into the Amazon goes all the way back at least into the 1960s. And this is part of this idea of development, which I think is an idea that probably many people in their classes, students in their classes, have interrogated a little bit. Like, what do we mean when we say that? And what kind of dichotomies or comparisons are we setting up? But if you think about, so what is the Amazon being cut down for? Things like soybeans, which for a while were being used for biofuel, so uneconomically friendly. It was supposedly substitute for petroleum, but it has its own environmental consequences, which we can see quite clearly now with the clear cutting of the Amazon and the burning of it, because that forest canopy is lost. Meat, anytime you go to McDonald's or Burger King, for a long time, Brazilian cattle was another huge consumer of the Amazon forest. Increasingly, China is buying up some of the soybeans and these other materials, or wood, right, for your cheap IKEA furniture, or to feed agro-industrial farming in China. All of this is driving deforestation, and we're involved in it as consumers, if nothing else. Right. So to being able to see those connections internationally and where we are in the supply chain and how our, and then thinking about those questions of consumption really seriously, I think is important. I also think Latin America presents a really important history of resource management and extraction. And, sometimes it's very depressing, or it's like negative examples of resource extraction and management history. And sometimes it's really positive. So cautionary tales, you can start with silver mining at Potosi in Bolivia that the Spanish were doing. And they took a mountain that was so full of silver that they pulled all of the silver out and distributed that all through Europe, and really European imperialism writ large in some ways, and the banking industry and all sorts of things were transformed by this sudden rush of precious metal into Europe. But Potosi itself was completely stripped of all of its silver within about 200 years. So it's really a quite amazing story. Guano, which was in Peru, harvested primarily by Chinese laborers who were brought over by the British, who came to an agreement with Peru, with the Peruvian state, to kind of share the wealth. But they got first dibs at what was this incredible fertilizer, which gave us the birth of agro-industrial farming. We could only be eating and producing the food that we produce now at the sort of quantities that we produce it, because of this discovery of what happens when you apply this very strong fertilizer, which later was replaced by chemical fertilizers. But the Peruvian states, this is a really interesting case, because the Peruvian state is an interesting example of when they saw that the cormorant birds that were producing this guano was, basically bird shit that's been petrified over years and years and years, and it's really potent, it was threatening the existence of the birds themselves. The Peruvian state went in and started regulating that and basically managed to save the cormorant population. The Peruvian state's also been very active in assessing, for example, glaciers in the Andes and glacier melt, flooding, and now increasingly receding. The glaciers are actually disappearing now. And so you can see lots of interesting positive examples. Another interesting example, we have a bus rapid transit that's being developed in Milwaukee going out to the suburbs now. That was the first example of that being implemented successfully in a city-wide metropolitan way was in Brazil, and then it was adopted by Bogota, Colombia. And this was, 25 years ago. So we learn a lot from these experiments in other places, even if we don't realize that that's what we're doing necessarily.